Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh.
So on the show today, Simon Thakur. So Simon is joining us from Australia. He created a very interesting system of movement that he's going to tell us about. Really big, that's called Ancestral Movement, a big background in martial arts, yoga, various kinds of dance and movement, academic qualifications. It came recommended to me by my friend Rafe Kelly, who was on the show. So Simon, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Thanks.
So you're in Australia?
I am. I'm in Canberra.
And how did you get interested in movement? What was your journey into this?
I was first introduced to yoga as a concept, as a thing, when I was about 3, because my dad's Indian, and he's never done not even a minute of yoga in his life, but obviously he knows about yoga. But when I was about 3, one day he noticed that I was sitting pretty comfortably with my hips out, and he was like, "Oh, try putting your foot up on your thigh like this." And I did. And then he's like, "Oh, try putting your other foot up on your other thigh like that. And, now put your hands on your knees like this and close your eyes." And then just sort of started laughing at me. But he was like, "Oh, you should learn yoga. You'd be really good." And so as a little kid, I already became somehow fascinated with these weird looking people sitting in the forest doing funny postures and, focusing their eyes between the point between their eyebrows and that sort of thing. So I was already kind of drawn to that kind of thing. And then of course I also grew up reading fantasy novels. And one of my best friends when I was 5, his dad was a judo black belt. And so us little 5-year-olds would put on our white pajamas and go along to judo club a few times a week and that sort of thing. So between that combination of fantasy with sword fighting and yoga and magical powers and, martial arts, I was I was, even as a kid, I was pretty much obsessed with that kind of stuff. And I guess my parents kind of wanted me to play tennis and cricket and regular kind of things and hoped that I'd just get over my strange martial arts complex, but it never seemed to happen. So
got deeper and deeper into the martial arts.
Well, yeah, I guess so. And that meant for me that meant a long time living in Asia and living in Japan, living in China, living in Thailand and studying not just martial arts, but meditation and Chinese medicine and what have you. But then, obviously, most people who stick with traditional martial arts for long enough go through a sort of a period of disillusionment and whatnot. And, so nowadays I still practice I still practice my Chinese internal stuff daily because it's I've been working on it for a long time and I'm making progress little by little, but also, at some point was hey, I actually really just want to spar and wrestle and, that sort of thing. So, so it's kind of sure, martial arts, but not necessarily quite as naive or romantic about the whole thing as I once was.
Yeah, there's a certain fantasy to the traditional martial arts, isn't there, which doesn't taste of reality when you put it to the test quite often.
Yeah, and it's not that the skills aren't real. It's just that the general sort of standard of training partners is not as formidable, perhaps, as what you might get in a wrestling gym. So even if you feel like you're doing really good with your whatever it might be, karate or kung fu kind of stuff, if you're only testing it in very limited games against people who are mostly overweight or skinny or not very athletic, then you kind of can get a bit definitely unrealistic in terms of your how good you think you are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, fully. Yeah, gone through that experience myself with Aikido, and then trying sort of boxing and wrestling and BJJ, and going, okay, there's lots to be desired here, both in terms of the method of the training partners, and sometimes technique. So you did the sort of full Asian thing. This is more common in Australia, I should say. It seems to be that people are more likely to go to Japan and Australia. That's a sort of big leap from the UK and America.
Interesting.
But I've got a number of Aikido friends, for example, who have spent time in training in Japan there, and it's just like you did sort of the full thing, going off to China for a few years.
Yeah, well, I lived in Thailand on a student exchange for a year when I was 18, so after my last year of high school, and then was practicing Muay Thai and learning about like Buddhism and the sort of Theravada Buddhist stuff that's going on in South Thailand there, which was really awesome. And then went back to Australia and couldn't find a good Muay Thai gym, but found some traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu and also some really good Tai Chi and Chinese internal martial arts. And then I bailed and went to Japan for a few years, and then back to Australia for a couple of years again. And then I went off to China for I was about 1 year in China and 2 years in Taiwan, with a couple of big stints in India and Brazil in between. So yeah, I was and it wasn't just martial arts, it was meditation and yoga, and I was studying Chinese medicine and so on, just kind of looking for the most interesting teachers and practice groups that I could find.
And with the Mohans in India, which is a pretty big deal as well, right? I mean, they're like strong lineage there.
Yeah, they're amazing. That was finding the yoga they were teaching. It was kind of like that was what I'd been looking for a long time, and I'd kind of started thinking that level of systematic understanding of the breath and the body and the mind that wasn't to be found, or maybe wasn't to be found in India anymore. I mean, I'm sure there's, in countries that big, there's always going to be amazing practitioners that you're just never going to hear about. But yeah, I felt really lucky to find the Mohans, because the way they organize their teaching works really well for someone like me, like the way I think about things.
And I'm just curious if the fact that you're Australian but from Indian heritage, how's that being in India? I mean, I should say to our listeners that you're brown. I am. Most people think Australians are all white or Aboriginal, but there's a pretty big ethnic diversity in Australia now.
Yeah.
So how was it being an Indian Australian in India? I'm trying to kind of get my head around that. Yeah,
it's definitely a thing. It's an experience because I'm brown and I've got the facial hair of an Indian and the bone structure of an Indian, but then blue eyes from my mum's side and some sort of mix from the North Indian side of my dad's family. But so also when I lived in India as an adult, because I went a few times as a kid, but then I didn't go again until later. So when I was in India as an adult, in those days, I also had like a massive beard and dreadlocks, big fat, like scruffy dreadlocks down to my ass. And so, and I was doing lots of yoga and stuff. And so being in India looking like that, people were, they would sort of, people would ask me to bless them and things. And
you do it a quick that.
Yeah, if I'd wanted to, I probably could have like started a massive spiritual cult just from having the look. It's like I noticed in India, it's like having a big beard and looking Indian. It was actually really useful in such a crowded place, and I don't deal too well with crowds and lots of people in your personal space trying to interact and things. And once I had the beard, then I could just be quiet and just sort of acknowledge people with my eyes and then turn away, and they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, like bearded guy doesn't want to talk. Okay, we'll respect that. Yeah, nice. I've been in some of those crowded countries, and that sounds like a real blessing. And it was funny, actually, isn't it? What people project on you based on how you look. I've lived in different countries and had various looks, and it's funny what people put on that. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, you're being very casual about this, but this is kind of a big deal that you went kind of around the world, studying with different teachers. I mean, I'm imagining people listening to this would be like, wow, I'd love to do that, but I can't because of family or money.
Yeah.
I did a similar thing with Aikido for a few years, traveled around with different Aikido teachers and different embodiment teachers. And I remember people being some of them were like jealous, some were resentful, some were kind of just in awe, like, how do you do that? And I just kind of found a way through making bits of money here and there and just being non-attached to various things. But I mean, like, what was the practice? That's a big endeavor to really get on your bike and go around the world that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I'm really glad that I did it when I was younger, because there's no way that I would even want to do it now. And I think part of it was like I grew up. So I grew up in New Zealand, in the South Island, with just my mum and my dad and my older brother. So just the four of us, and our extended families were in India and in Australia. So we'd sort of see them occasionally, but not often. And then then I moved to Australia when I was 15. Then I did that student exchange when I was 17 to Thailand. And then I kind of just got in this rhythm where, like, every year or two at the most, I would be living in a different country, learning a new language, studying and looking for like cool teachers and studying like the shit that I thought was the coolest stuff in the world. And just like getting by on like, doing bits of work here and there and teaching some yoga and doing massage and body work and stuff. And, I managed to score a couple of little scholarships to study when I was in Taiwan and that sort of thing. And yeah, it was, it was awesome, but it was also like, what people don't realize, like, that was 10 years of my life.
Yeah.
From about the age of 17, until I came back to Australia when I was 29, or was it 30? I can't remember, from my last big trip. And so there was 10 years living overseas in that time. And, living in like Tokyo and Shanghai and Taipei and like often living in these massive, super crowded, super polluted cities where, you're living off noodles and,
yeah, I used to do that. Just living off crap, because that's the one. What I had money for. Yeah.
And you're also missing out on the relationships that are developing back in your home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like you go away for 4 years and you come back and you're like, hey, yeah, like these people, yeah, we're, my great friends from before. And they're like, man, like you've been gone a long time. And
people start having kids, people's careers are moving on.
Yeah.
I found I didn't develop some social skills quite properly because I'd been spending so much time in a dojo in this weird social context that life skills are a little underdeveloped. And
well, that's half the reason that I was able to leave and do that, was because of my like poorly developed like social skills, which meant that I didn't have necessarily super strong attachments, or I had strong attachments, but I was often always sort of hedging my bets and being like, like, not too many obligations, not too serious a job or too like relationships, and being like, I'm always going to leave. And then I'd leave and go on my big solo, quest around the world. And, and I was loving it, absolutely loving it, but also like, like lonely and miserable in a lot of ways. So that's the thing people don't realize, is that it's often a really big sacrifice. It's not all like cool and fun.
Yeah, people used to say to me, "Oh, I wish I could do what you do," and I used to say to them, particularly if they're under 30 and didn't have kids and a mortgage, I used to say, "Well, you can, and you'll have to sacrifice this, and this. Are you sure?
Totally.
Are you sure you want to do that? Because it looks, you do Aikido twice a week for fun, and it looks to you like I'm just on this fun extended adventure, which is partly true, and I've sacrificed all these things. Like, you have a girlfriend. I couldn't possibly have a steady girlfriend living life, jumping around the world. And, still, anyone listening to this is in their 20s and into body, mind stuff. I'd say this is still worth it. I don't want to go, like, go do it. Like, that's the time, because now, being married, it's having responsibilities, running a business. Is if I can get a couple of weeks to go do a training course now, that's massive,
Yeah.
And the idea of just spending 6 months living in a dojo for me now is almost impossible. So it's like I encourage people to take the opportunity when they have that freedom.
Yeah, exactly. I always thought to myself that, like, if I've got like this burning passion for this stuff and the opportunity to go and do these things, and like, and I'm, I'm prepared to like give up some other things in order to go do that. I always sort of thought, well, if I don't do it, like, who's going to do it?
Yeah.
Who's going to learn that stuff? Who's going to take the time to learn the language, find the quality stuff and then bring it back and whatever. Yeah. So I've always kind of figured that's kind of my job, is not just the learning of that kind of thing, but the translation of what I think is most useful from those traditions, the translation into like English and everyday language and within the scientific paradigm and that sort of thing.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the ways you've translated them. So you had this period of kind of really extended and in-depth studies. And then at some point you kind of decided to come back home to Australia. Like, what was the birth for this ancestral movement system that you'd come up with?
Yeah. So despite being like obsessed with weird esoteric stuff my whole life, I also grew up in a very strongly atheist, skeptical, sort of quite intellectual family, and also had a fairly high quality scientific education all through school and high school, and then my first couple of years of university was also studying evolutionary biology and like physics and chemistry and also anthropology, archaeology, sociology. I was really intellectually fascinated and very, very curious about life and biological life and, like physics and chemistry and like what's going on? How does this like reality come to be, and how does it all fit together? And wow, the like animal kingdom and the vegetable, the plants and then humans, and going like, wow, humans and human evolution, and just constantly thinking about evolution and like how did we get to where we are now? How did this story come to be the way it is? And so while I was studying Chinese medicine and all these, martial arts, and a lot of, I was really deeply into Indian yoga, really deeply into my Buddhist meditation practice and Buddhist philosophy, and really into Taoism and the Chinese sort of just that whole culture of mind-body stuff and mind-body interacting with nature that you get in China. And but at the same time, I was studying anatomy and studying physiology and medical, like just doing, because when you study Chinese medicine in most places, you're also forced to study a lot of Western medicine at the same time.
Yeah.
And they'll often be telling you, while they're teaching you this, they'll often be telling you, don't try and translate between Chinese medicine and Western medicine. It doesn't work. And I was always just like, whatever, like that's such a cop out to say, don't even try, because, it's just, if you start thinking in different ways and translating between cultures, like I'd already been doing on my student exchange and things, you start to work stuff out. And so, I was always trying to interpret like yoga, like where does a person or a whole culture of people learning to become still and focus their attention on their breath and focus their attention on attention and retrain their minds and their brains to like sense deeper and deeper and deeper what's going on in the body and how that relates to the breath and the emotions and all this stuff. And I'm just sort of going like, evolutionarily speaking, how do these abilities come about? Like, how did a bunch of primates evolve abilities for like language and nonverbal communication, but then all of these dance forms and all of these different things that we do? And obviously, I was practicing meditation, I was practicing yoga, I was practicing Chinese arts, and I was spending a lot of time in the forest or in the bush, as we call it here, out in nature in Australia. And I was doing a lot of capoeira Angola. So capoeira Angola is the old style capoeira, which is more explicitly, very strongly influenced by the ancestral African traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And so with all of that mix going on, I was having a lot of really interesting experiences of doing breathing practices, meditation practices, and all of these things, often focused around the center line of the body, the spine and things. And various experiences were emerging from wherever, from my body, through my body, in my body, and often in the form of like spinal waves, weird contractions, breath pausing, sensations of like heat and vibration and energy and strange altered states. And I was trying to make sense of them. What's going on with this stuff? Why should my spine start spontaneously undulating in meditation? And then if I go with that, why should it feel so amazing? Why should spinal waves with weird sphincter contractions in the belly and the throat and things, why should that feel so incredibly, incredibly good and somehow profound? And so, thinking about this sort of stuff and then doing capoeira and going and climbing trees and being in the bush and so on. And for a long time, I called a lot of my personal training, I called it monkey body training.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing yoga and doing traditional martial arts, but also doing capoeira Angola, which is very like monkey-like, and spending a lot of time in the bush, moving through forests and undergrowth at night and climbing up and down hills and waterfalls and things, and just noticing all of these innate abilities in the body, that you must have had the experience where, say you're it's like what, when people talk about flow states and stuff, when you're up a tree and you're doing stuff in trees and you relax to the point and you realize your body actually knows what to do by itself. Things that you've never necessarily been taught.
Yeah, I used to like running through the trees. I remember even at high school, there's a little wood by where I was at high school. And there was something about running through it, and the sort of movement would take over itself. And it was this kind of primal thing, like I was hunting. I wasn't into any of that stuff then. I was a kind of hippie poet. But there was something about moving through the woods that I just realized I liked a lot. And jumping across the paths and kind of tracking where the animals were and that kind of thing. And I had some sense of this is probably in my system on a deep level.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of that kind of thing was sort of where I started. And then I was thinking about these sorts of things for years. And then, looking at animal mimicry traditions in Chinese martial arts and in yoga postures and in capoeira, it's huge as well. And then in, learning about shamanism and different, spirit possession and all these sorts of different things that you get in all these different cultures. Because, when I'm reading anthropology and stuff at the same time. And then, a bunch of experiences over many years started to crystallize into this, understanding that, so firstly, that I am a primate and I have this whole range of behaviors and movement abilities and cognitive abilities inherent in me because of my primate ancestry. But then I, as these things were sort of emerging from my experimentation and my practice and my explorations, I found oh wow, there's a whole range of behaviors and movement patterns which I carry in me just in the tube from my teeth to my anus. You know what I mean? That there's this whole range of behaviors that are just concerned with getting stuff to the mouth, tasting it, chewing it, swallowing it, passing it through me and shitting it out again the other side. And then there's this other whole layer of movement patterns and abilities, sensory abilities, cognitive abilities and social things which are inherent in me because I'm a vertebrate, because I have a basic central axis with a segmented body plan and a left side and a right side, and these undulating movements which move me through the world and so on are inherent in the spine because I'm evolved from fish, because I have an ancestry spanning hundreds of millions of years in the ocean. before our family even came out on the land. And then we came out on land and we start to, evolving limbs, and we start to get these side to side sort of wriggly patterns and then with the front limbs and hind limbs, the alternating cross body patterns that we share with all of the creatures that have 4 limbs, because we all evolved from the same original sort of reptile-like things 350 million years ago. And then again, another whole range of behaviors involving like galloping patterns and the different sorts of undulations that you get in mammals and amphibians. And so like as all these things, like first it was these disparate kind of threads of like contemplation and not being able to verbalize it and going, wow, why am I so concerned with this stuff? Why is it so interesting? And then at some point, around 10 years ago or so, it all came together and I was like, aha, like the whole record, or not the whole record, but a record of the entirety of our ancestry is present not just in the genes, it's present in the structure of the body itself and in the nervous system itself. So this, like the cortex, the modern human cortex is like this thin layer of humanness on top of this whole world of innate and ancient abilities beneath that, which often show up in the form of movement patterns. And those movement patterns are, by every culture, either encouraged or forbidden.
Okay, so let me recap a little bit here. So I've been
sure.
Studying various things, very traditional Chinese martial arts methods, observing animals, looking at different cultures and how they, encourage or discourage movements. You kind of worked out there was these patterns of primal movement which come from different stages of our evolution. And I've come across this idea in body mind centering too, that there's this sort of worm-like stuff, the fish-like stuff, the lizard-like stuff, the homolateral patterns, the heterolateral patterns. And you realize there's all these different ways of moving, and then layers. It's not like we just were formed, we weren't designed on a computer as a perfect human. We evolved with each stage being sort of layered on top of the next. Yeah. And I mean, what's the advantage of sort of going back to these then? Is it just a sort of health advantage? Is it that there's different aspects of ourself available with these different movements? Yeah. What's the point, I guess I'm asking?
Yeah, totally. No, it's such a important question is, well, that was sort of what I was asking myself while a lot of this stuff was happening, of like, why am I compelled to move like this? Secondly, why does it feel so great and so interesting? And then also going, well, why am I discovering all of these movement patterns only at times when no one else is around, I'm in nature, and there's no fear of being seen or judged? And so what's the point? I reckon there's a whole lot of points. It's like for health, there are huge implications for basically freeing up all of the parts of the body which are habitually stuck, which in every culture is going to be different. And in, the culture here in Australia, it's like the range of socially acceptable movement patterns is actually it's quite limited. And what that does is it means that, people grow up having no concept that they can get movement between the ribs or movement between each and every vertebra of the spine, for example. And so people's spines become really, really stiff and their rib cages become locked. And then, obviously there's a back pain epidemic. Sorry, Mark, what was that?
Yeah, just jumping in. I came across that one in Indian dancing. I was kind of asked to move my ribs, in a kind of lateral movement. Maybe people listening at home can try that without moving the shoulders or the hips, just the ribs kind of moving around. And I started trying to make little circles with my ribs. And I just realized, like, seeing Indian dancers, I was like, wow, these guys can do this really easily, and the women even more so. But for me, it was just an impossible movement. Another one was to raise a hip. Like, as a sort of white British man, I stood on the ground, and I remember seeing this North African dance, and the woman kind of pops her hip up in this kind of sassy, sexy way. And I just couldn't do it. It took me like a couple of months to work out how to do it. And then I thought, hang on a minute, these are pretty simple things. I knew I had enough biology knowledge to know there was no biological limitation. I had the muscles.
Yeah.
I didn't have the brain pathways. They'd been atrophied. And I went, oh, my culture's limiting my movement. And therefore, it's limiting my being, like not being able to move the chest and not being able to move the hips. There's emotional, relational capacities that correlate with those movements.
Yeah.
I thought, hang on a minute, like every culture in a way is a straitjacket.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So totally like that, the rib cage and the spine, it's like, you're going to suffer, but you potentially, it's not that you'll suffer from more back pain if you don't know how to move your spine. It's just that if and when you do suffer from back pain and you don't know how to move every little bit of your spine, you also don't know how to relieve tension from every little bit of your spine, for example. Whereas if you have a really free, strong, sensitive central axis with all of those little muscles that connect to the spine and all of those little muscles that connect to the rib cage and the deep parts of the hips and stuff, then you get the ability to relieve discomfort in your own body to a very sophisticated degree, and you get the ability to express with all of those parts, whether that's in performance or in dance or even just in gesture and verbalization and vocalization, like the different breathing patterns you get through the rib cage, the different tones of voice, the ability to take different shapes with the body, that can, as that opens up, it's almost like the range of expression of your character opens up.
Yeah, I mean, from an embodiment point of view, where moving is a way of being, so what's being limited there is kind of behavioral range and the possibilities of your being, as well as the health impact.
Right.
I don't study this in a sophisticated way, but I've always liked, for example, getting down on the floor with kids and moving around like a dog. I'll chase kids around like I'm a dog. And there's something about that. Adults look kind of shocked when I do that because I've gone to a plane of movement that's sort of not allowed. I was doing it in a hotel lobby the other day, and the staff were looking at me like, "Is that even legal?" You know? And all I was doing, was running around on all fours, chasing this little kid who was very happy to be chased. And but there was something about being in touch with my more kind of primal animal self that remains from when I'm on all fours or rolling around or jumping through the air, climbing on things like a monkey. It connects me with a different part of myself that feels sort of less civilized in a very good way.
Yeah. I like to imagine, cultures, because that's another thing that becomes apparent looking in anthropological literature is that, any cultures that live, sort of the less urbanized the culture, the more direct access they have with untouched or can never say untouched, but ecosystems with less human interference, the more interactions they've got with wild animals and plants and so on. It's like people in those cultures or those cultures across the board, it seems, practice animal mimicry in their dance and practice copying the shapes, sounds and movements of not just the animals, but everything in the ecosystem in their traditions of storytelling and theatre. Whereas in our current, in Australia, in most urbanized city building cultures, animal movements or animalistic movements have become taboo, forbidden to a certain extent. As I guess we've gone through a long phase of deliberately setting ourselves apart from the rest of the natural world and the other animals and stuff. And now we've got to a point where it's like, hey, maybe we've gone too far with that and we need to actually start to celebrate a bit more all the things that we have in common with the other creatures that we're living with.
More doggy style is what you're saying, right?
More doggy style, all the different animal styles, worm style, fish style.
Okay, I've got my homework for this evening's set then.
Yeah, totally. So that Mark is actually beyond all the health stuff. Depending on who I'm working with, I'll emphasize health stuff and the neuroplasticity angle, and all the stuff about pain science and chronic pain being due to changes in the brain as much as or more than changes in the tissues and the muscles and tendons. And so, because I used to be a rehabilitation practitioner for a long time, and so I've done a lot of work in those realms. But the main, like the thing that is most precious to me with the whole like ancestral movement concept is that of exploring our anatomy and our movements in such a way that we see and we feel all of these things that we have in common with all of these other creatures, and we get this feeling of what shared ancestry really means, that having a common ancestor with a worm, and because we have a common ancestor with a worm or any other creature with a segmented body plan, we also have these same ancient undulating movements inherent in our bodies. And then same with the fish and the lizards and the frogs and the monkeys and the horses and all of these things. And we start to see and feel more and more strongly that we really belong here. We've been here since the very beginning, along with all of these other creatures. And you start to see a horse as a different kind of human. You see a frog with its front limbs and its hind limbs and its mouth and its eyes and its nose, and you go, wow, okay. You get this for me, really special, really profound feeling of kinship with other creatures.
Profound.
And so that to me is the deeper point of doing these practices. And I think that culturally that's potentially actually something really important, which we need a little bit more of as we go through this period of rapid ecosystem destruction and, disconnection from land and all that sort of thing.
Mm. Yeah, there's profound kind of ecological implication to what you're saying, of seeing yourself as part of a continuity in connection with nature, rather than seeing yourself as something, human as opposed to nature, which on the one hand I think may have been necessary for a certain part of our development, but it's kind of led to pretty serious consequences.
Yeah.
A couple of risks. I don't think you fall into these, but I'd like to hear you address them. One is the sort of idealization of tribal peoples, kind of like, even though they kind of practice maybe cannibalism or mass warfare or huge mortality. And the other one would be, should we be impersonating animals? Like I've seen a lot of this in Chinese martial arts, like crane style or, this kind of animal. When we actually do have a different structure, I mean, like structurally, it's very difficult for a human being to run on all fours. You can get an impersonation of it, but we're never going to be a cheetah.
Yeah, great. So, good questions.
Two potential pitfalls. And so I don't hear you falling into it, but I could hear people could mishear what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So on the first point, I do often have to state this, actually, because of the whole paleo movement and all that sort of thing, is I'm not trying to advocate a particular way of life. I'm not claiming, and I don't believe that any particular tribal group or human group anywhere on the planet ever has had it all worked out. I think that, humans are humans, and every society has beautiful things in it, and every society seems like has like all sorts of problems. Like they might be ecologically in perfect harmony, but socially really, really repressive, or they might be the opposite. They might make amazing art, but practice slavery, or, like all that sort of thing. And so I'm absolutely not trying to push any sort of worldview on that. And I'm also not saying that we should move. I'm not putting up ancestral movement as being a concept of like certain kinds of movements are natural and others are unnatural, and you should only do natural ones, and gyms are bad and don't ever do isolated movements and any of that stuff. I completely do not hold that opinion. I think that the whole point of the ancestral movement idea is to use it as a lens to better understand all of the things that we're doing, including like, you know, robot style breakdancing, or including isolated, like doing bicep curls all day long to get big biceps. It's like, I'm not saying anything's better than anything else, but just going, there's this massive range of abilities, and some of them are due to our ancient ancestry. Well, all of them are influenced by our ancient ancestry, but then on top of all of these primate patterns, like ancient human patterns of running and climbing and jumping and throwing and digging in the dirt and, you know, grooming each other and stuff, we also have this amazing, amazing, amazing world of movement abilities unique to modern humans, living in cities. And, you know, like, pick any random thing. You look at dance clips on YouTube and there's people doing amazing stuff, and it's like, some of it, you know, it's like, it's incredible. And so part of the thing of like looking at the innate abilities from our ancient ancestry is then to also give us a greater appreciation for what's uniquely human, what no monkey can do, what no cheetah, what no other animal can do. There's all of these things that humans can do just with movement and expression and nonverbal communication and emotion and stuff, which is, you know, absolutely unique to humans and is incredible stuff. So,
and you don't see other animals copying other animals, really.
Exactly.
We have this sort of flexibility that's really incredible.
Yeah, totally. And so then on your second point about, you know, should humans be impersonating other animals, is I feel like, so when I teach, I basically never, unless I'm playing with kids, I basically never say, pretend you're a monkey or pretend you're a lizard or something, because in most cases, when people do that, it's like awkward, horribly inhibited, and like just feels like, to me, it makes me cringe and makes me feel like really lame, because I haven't grown up with that. And so we've got this, like, it's like, okay, you get a bunch of adults, you tell them to pretend to be animals. Usually they do a pretty shit job because they haven't done it very much. If they were from a culture who did practice copying animals, or like I've got one good friend who spent like a year studying chimpanzee movement with an expert for a theater piece. And so he's really good at doing the movements and facial expressions and gestures of chimpanzees. And it's cool. But so I would never say don't do it. Like I would totally encourage everyone to do it. Like, yeah, I think we should be doing it more. And I think we should be doing it a lot more as kids, and then try and not stop doing it as adults. But when I teach, I do not teach like that. When I teach movements which highlight, they bring to light the actual structure of our bodies. The fact that in our spines, that our spine is not a rod, that we have like 7 vertebrae in the neck, 12 in the thoracic spine, 5 in the lumbar, then the sacrum and coccyx, and that all of those joints are able to move in flexion, extension, lateral flexion, rotation, and all of the combinations. And when all of them are actually able to move with power and sensitivity, we get these undulating, snaky, fish-like, eel-like, monkey-like movements coming out of our spines, because that's how our spines are built. And then same with the 4 limbs. We've got all these locomotion patterns which are possible with the limbs, but if we just practice things which show how the limbs are put together and how they connect to the spine, then we see, we have these innate patterns that we share with all of these other animals. So we don't need to pretend to be primates anymore. We feel like, yeah, I'm a primate, 100%. And you get those movements out of the spine, and it's not like you're pretending to be fish. You get this actual far more profound realization that in the center of our body, we are still fish. We are still bony fish.
Finding your own fishiness rather than pretending to be a fish.
Rather than pretending to be a fish. It's a very, very different experience, and it's totally life-changing when it happens. And it's like you don't even have to practice those movements anymore. Once you've made that switch and you can see it and you can feel it, then the world doesn't look the same.
Nice. So what is the main thing you feel like you're kind of really helping people with these, like what do you actually do for a job? Like you're taking workshops, you're kind of doing
Yeah.
these cool movements. I've seen videos of like you guys off in the woods having fun. I mean, it looks tremendous fun. And what's the sort of main offer you're actually making to people there?
Well, yeah, it's a pretty mixed bag, and again, it does depend who I'm working with. So I work a lot with, like, most of the people who come to study with me are like therapists or dancers or like fitness people and trainers and physiotherapists, and also then we get psychologists and actors and sort of a whole range of people, and then also people with chronic pain and injuries and physical disorders that they want to work on, because that combination of elements, like I'm talking about, of we don't just practice animal movements. In fact, like what stereotypical sort of animal movements is a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of what we do, but we do very thorough anatomical explorations, which are really, really, really effective for rehabilitation and, strengthening and relaxing every part of the body to prevent injuries and heal injuries and just feel better and become more and more physically capable, no matter who you are, even if you're like a really top level athlete or, an out of shape person with chronic illness or disability. It's like this whole art of exploring the body is the main thing that I teach, the way of exploring and little by little peeling back layers so that we can feel more. We can feel more detail, more clarity in all of the joints, in all of the little articulations. And so the body map becomes better, clearer, more detailed, and also more full of like good feelings and feelings of joy and competence and resilience and stuff. So that's the main sort of work. And then the ancestral stuff is it's a side effect of the work in a way. That's how it happened to me. It's like I wasn't looking specifically for that stuff, but just through the embodied practice, this whole world of discovering the ancestry innate in the body emerged from the body work itself. So that's what we do, and we do regular classes and we do workshops and retreats and things. And I used to, like I said, I worked for like 10 years as a therapist, like a body worker, doing exercise rehab and remedial massage and all, lots of those sorts of things. And then I got to a point where I was just like, look, man, doing movement and breathing and meditation with people works better than going into a room and doing body work.
Yeah, I've experienced this. I dance 5 rhythms every week, and like just a couple of hours of free movement, following my breath and letting the body unwind seems to work much better than any sort of physiotherapy exercises I may have been given, by a professional.
Yeah. The physio stuff is, it's fantastic, but it's like a stepping stone, and it's a stepping stone towards actually doing stuff with your body. And so if you can create a learning environment or a training environment where it's accepted that everyone has injuries, everyone has weaknesses, no one can do everything, and it's a place where we can safely work together and get better, then people get better. People just have to show up. Whereas doing body work and trying to do your physio exercises on your own and that sort of thing is a lot harder for most people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what's really live for you right now? Is there something you're particularly enjoying looking at or studying that's kind of juicy for you right now?
Yeah. So I've just recently moved back to Canberra a few months ago, and so after a few years on the road up and down the East Coast and exploring, and so I'm really enjoying being back and able to run regular classes again with the same group of people every week, also I've started some postgrad studies in ecology and biological anthropology, which I'm very excited about because that's been my passion for a long time. And, so I'm sort of may as well, go back to uni and really, really dive into it. So that's a lot of my time is at the moment devoted to those studies. And then the main thing that I'm doing on a daily and weekly basis at the moment is learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and doing wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, fun and compelling. How do you decide? Like, I look at someone like you or Rafe, and to a slightly lesser extent myself, that has a pretty strong movement background, and I kind of think there's so much out there, and now we've become generalists. We like all these different things. They all feed into our work.
Yeah.
How do we choose? How do you make that decision? Like, I went to one class yesterday. I might make one class today. I've got one bodywork session today. But it's like, we're pretty busy now. I don't know if you're a family man, you run a business, you're teaching workshops. Like, how do you decide where to spend your time now? For me, money is less of a factor, but time's a big factor now.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I kind of reckon you can almost simplify it to two sort of things. Like, what do I, if I'm just speaking for myself, what do I most need practice-wise for my health and my, I'm nearly 40 now, and my body's riddled with injuries and things, and so it's sort of like, well, how do I keep my health and physical condition improving so that I can keep having lots of fun into my old age, not just into my old age, but right now. Like, so what do I need to do to keep my health and basic physical competence improving? And then what's most interesting? What am I excited by? And for me at the moment, that's like, rolling on the ground, like trying not to get my arm snapped off every day until I'm like, really tired and sore. But so, because everyone's different in that regard. Someone might have done lots of strength training, but then they're stiff and tight and in lots of pain. And so it's like, some people need more of a relaxation practice. Some people, I work with a lot of dancers, for example, and it's sort of like, I advocate to a lot of my friends, like, you are really good at all this sensitive movement stuff, and you're going to keep doing it because that's who you are, and you should keep doing it. But if you chuck in 2 half-hour sessions a week of strength training, then you're really going to change your life in a very short time, and lots of these aches and pains and niggling injuries and personality issues will resolve or improve from doing a bit more strength training. So I kind of reckon, find what your weakest areas are and maybe work on them a bit if you're up for it, and then just do what you're passionate about, or find something fun.
Yeah, for me, there's always this balance of flows. Like, sometimes it's just like, hey, I just want to do something fun. Like, and I think there's a lot in going with just what's live. Like, hey, that really appeals to me. So I'm probably going to turn up to training even when I'm tired. I'm probably going to work really hard and put the work in, look at the YouTube videos after class. And, so sometimes I'm just following what's alive and what's fun. And I found that's probably the best thing. But then I'm also looking at, okay, how does this fit with the rest of my life? Like, my life's I work pretty hard, I push pretty hard, so often I need a much more yin practice to balance that out. Yeah. And then, it's day by day. Like, yesterday I did an animal flow class just because I knew I only had an hour to move and I wanted something quite intense. And I just felt in my system, after sitting in a computer and interviewing lots of people and typing lots of emails, I wanted to be like quite a rigorous movement,
Right.
And then there's like what's good for my career, like what are the parts of my, like what am I lacking? Like, I realize I'm lacking body work compared to some embodiment people. Like, I could do more martial arts, and like, but is that really what's going to help round out what I do professionally? And then personally, like, for me, it's like, I'm looking at really sensitive body work, because it's like, that's sometimes where I lack like interpersonal skill, is like the sensitivity to other people. And rather than the kind of, I've done a lot of improv comedy, I can make people laugh and have fun with people, but it's like, there's a gap in the kind of the personality skill set as well there. So I don't know, it's kind of a combination of these factors for me. But if I had to pick one, it's just sort of going with what instinctively is most alive.
Yeah. I think it's different if you're a professional, like embodiment person or whatever, like we are, because for me, I have this idea that it's my professional responsibility in a way to be at least basically competent in not just all this weird stuff that I do that's different to what other people do, but at least get basic competence in what most other people are doing. So like, I had this sort of like moment some years ago when, someone was talking about meditation, and I knew, just because I have extensive background in practicing meditation, I could just tell that they hadn't done very much practice. Yeah. And they were talking about it. Yeah. As if they knew. And I was just like, well, I know that you don't know what you're talking about. And anyone else who's done a bunch of meditation will know that you don't know what you're talking about, because it's just really obvious to us. And then I was like, well, so then if I flip that the other way and think like, here's me, this like whatever movement guy talking about movement stuff, and any competent strength or fitness trainer or coach or whatever, athletic coach in the whole world would just look at me and be like, man, like this guy wouldn't have the first clue about like basic strength training. If you're not even competent with the basic barbell lifts, which everyone does, or, your running's crap, or just all of these things, which is like, well, okay, if everyone else is speaking this language and I haven't even put in the time, like 1 year of basic practice to even be able to speak their language, then why should they listen to me? They shouldn't. Yeah. I feel like you can do a lot in a year as well. What I've realized is like, it's good to have a couple of really in-depth specialisms. Like for me, it's yoga and Aikido and meditation place. But in a year, like if you dance tango 2 or 3 nights a week for a year, you'll get competent, you'll get a certain level of skill, or, do jiu-jitsu 2 or 3 times a week for a year. And I like to sort of pick something for a year and then really go for it. And then that year I go, okay, I'm not becoming an expert in a year, but I at least can then speak to those people. Like I did a year in weights, and I can, do you know what, just knowing what a bench press is, and knowing that people sometimes arch their back in a funny way while doing it. It's kind of like, okay, so I can kind of speak to someone that lifts weights now. I can speak to a tango dancer, and also I can recommend those practices. So I can say, you know what, you need to work a little bit on your passion and your sensitivity and your musicality. So maybe tango is good for you to a student. Right. And I go, and I can say from experience from that, from actually lived experience. And it's a big ask, I think, if you're like embodied generalists or integrators like we are, because there's so much good stuff out there. Like every time I interview someone, I'm like, I really want to do another 10 training courses, Yeah. And, but I feel like, as professionals, there's an integrity piece. For me, it's like do 1 class a day. That's my kind of basic standard. And then obviously some intensive periods. But if I'm doing 1 class in something a day, then it's like, plus my own, morning personal practice like I just did. It's like, at least I'm still learning. At least, I'd never done animal flow before yesterday. And I just hearing about it, and I was like, I knew I was interviewing you today, and I was like, that's kind of, that suits me personally. And it's a new thing to explore a little bit. And, maybe I'll do like 20 classes in that with my friend that's running it. And it's like, okay, then I'll have at least a proper taste. So there's that for me is the integrity piece. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, it's good because, like if you're doing a different thing every day, or also if you're spending like a year going deep into something, you're continually like, you're getting better at the stuff that you're good at, but you're continually going to something where you're a beginner, you're crap, and you go, I don't know this. I'm crap at this. And I want to get like just a little bit competent, little bit comfortable, so that I can hang with you guys, and then you do that with dance, or you do that with like athletics or parkour, or, all these different things. And it's like obvious that you're never gonna get good at everything, but the opening up of worlds, so you can go and play in that world, you can go and play in that world and play with those people and play with those people. And you're continually being humbled and recognizing your own, the huge gaps in your own knowledge. I think is also, I find it really, really valuable for myself.
I really like how you put it, the opening up of worlds, because that's really what it feels like. To me, it's like going to another culture and going, wow, I had no idea this is a human capacity that I at least now know exists. And I kind of can at least speak a little bit of that local language to chat to the natives and maybe learn a little more from them than I would as a tourist, you know? And I think there's something in that, like this kind of embodied traveling rather than embodied tourism, of going a little bit into it. And as you say, the humility, like I was crap at this thing yesterday. There's a couple of things I just couldn't do. And I'm working with a sore wrist on top of that. And I was like, okay, I just sent a whole bunch of students to comedy improv. And a whole bunch of them fucking hated it and were really out of their comfort zones. And now I get to see them next week at the intensive we're doing, the EFC intensive. And I go, look, I get what it's like to, like, recently I've also had this experience of being humbled and out of my comfort zone, feeling like a twat and worried that that pretty girl saw me and thought I was rubbish. And, you know, like the whole process that goes through one's head. And I can relate to them. Because for me, comedy improv is a piece of piss. That's just fun for me. So it's continuously putting myself in new places, because that's what I ask my students to do. Yeah. Okay, man. Well, we need to wrap up. In terms of finding more about you, it's ancestralmovement.com, right?
Yeah, that's the website. I haven't haven't had heaps of time to update and do those sorts of things on the website in the last couple of years, but I've written a bunch of posts and videos in previous years which are up there. And you know, one of my things with when I post stuff is I can't really be bothered putting up video or articles about stuff that other people are already doing perfectly well. I don't feel the need to say, look, I do that too. I can do that too. So the stuff that I've written on my website and the videos that I've put up have all been like things where I've been like, I've got some ideas that I want to put out there, which no one else that I can find is saying. And so I'm going to say it. And then hopefully some people will, you know, come and want to talk to me about it, and we can go from there. So yeah, there is some stuff on ancestralmovement.com, which is stuff that I find very, very interesting, and which I want more people in the world to be talking about. So people can check that out. Yep. We have an Ancestral Movement Facebook group as well, which is cranking along, and people can find me there as well.
That, and the site, you've got some reading list on there, you've got kind of some nice videos of this kind of stuff, because a lot of this stuff is easier to see than to talk about. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at some of that stuff that's up there. Bring up your Facebook group so I can share that as well.
Yeah, I'm meant to add you to that yesterday, actually.
It's all good. I just liked it. So
there's the page, but you can like the page, but the pages are rubbish. You want to join the group. That's where people actually talk about things.
Yeah, they've killed pages, haven't they? It's very difficult to see anything that comes on a page without paying. They've absolutely killed that in terms of what Facebook's done. I just don't get it. It's stupid for their business model, because people just won't use the pages, and then their advertising revenue will go down. You know, it just seems like really short term what they've done with that. Yeah, I'll link to the group rather than the page then. Okay, sir, this has been fun. Simon, thank you so much for your time. Do you have a kind of parting message about the body for listeners?
Oh, geez. Oh, really? Nah. No parting message. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
Cool, Mark. Thanks a lot.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon. Give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know so much is available for free now, and what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. More than I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.